sinners, it's Adam Nox, and welcome to another episode of the Cult of You and another interview with the devil, author of several books on the left-hand path, as well as several books in the areas of horror and fantasy novels. I'm talking about none other than Don Webb, author of The Energy Magic of the Vampire. Don's grounded approach to the subject of energy and the subject of vampirism makes it practical, not only being head of the order, master of the order of the vampire within the Temple of Set. He opens up to us today to talk about how he met Michael Aquino, how that journey got started, what inspired him to take that move, and he's honest about his own disenchantments of what was seen in the occult movement, to discovering concepts like the social parasite and working through those. His work with Lilith Aquino and helping her to discover her own sacred work, as well as one of my favorite authors, and probably one of yours as well, Dr. Stephen Flowers, or Edward Thorson as many of us know, who was his initiating priest at the time and has been the man that influenced his approach to the study. Donn has contributed great works across the spectrum in many areas and teaches the literary arts to many. In fact, his course on horror writing is one of the most sought after educational experiences for budding young writers. Talented, creative, and interesting and lucid, but also helps bring down to earth some very obscure ideas. We explore the Temple of Set, his journey there, his tenure there, and his current involvement, and we explore very much the book today. But I think the overall frame of its developmental progress is something that you will gain a lot of. The certain challenges that Donn provides, I still recommend that you get the book because there's just too much content to ever hope to cover. But I do hope that out of today's discussion, you get a sense of the man as well as a deeper understanding of some of the concepts and the development of those concepts that are shared inside of the work. He's authentic and real in the sense that he will not offer advice or concepts to which he doesn't carry a testimony in his own life, and that is something that I really and deeply respect about him. So I'm confident you're going to enjoy our conversation today, and if you've not read the book yet, make sure you get a copy. But for now, sit back, relax, and remember to live deliciously. Donn, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Cult of You. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I've heard great things about the show, and I was really quite thrilled when Inner Traditions forwarded me your note.
I was so happy. The fact of the matter is I've been secretly wanting to talk to you for ages, and when I was having the discussion with Ashley and they sent me, and I got a copy of, for everybody at home, Energy Magic of the Vampire, It was an intoxicating read, and I think for me the reason it was very intoxicating is because it was such a well-grounded piece of work. And I mean, your writing's always been very well-grounded, and that's something that I've always respected about you. But it took a very interesting subject, which is filled with Hollywood ideas and televised kind of visual effects persona, and brought it into the practical and gave a little bit of system of that. So I want to dive into some interesting questions, at least ones that have been very interesting and very curious for me, because this is the first time not only to get to talk to you about this book, but also about your work in the Temple of Set and the work, your journey with that. You, as far as I understand, pretty much got initiated into the Temple of Set in about 1989. So you're a veteran of knowledge in the field, and I remember listening to your story about writing to Dr. Aquino, and I've only had the experience of seeing YouTube videos of this individual and never actually getting to meet him in my life at all. Can you tell me a little bit about that, meeting Dr. Aquino, and what that was psychologically that differentiated him from all the typical New Age or alternative thinkers of the time period and in general today?
Well, there were a couple of things. Let me just tell you how I even encountered his name, and then I'll talk about our first couple of interactions. Some years ago, well, in 1988, there was a publisher who was putting together a anthology collection of stories about the Salem witch trials in America. And I am a writer of science fiction and horror, and he'd sent me notes, kind of, he said, you know a lot about the Salem witch trials. And of course, being a writer, I said, well, yes, I am an expert. And then, went to the library and tried to find out some things. And so I had gathered my research one night, and I started working out a timeline of how the superstition reached its height and then passed away. And I kind of wrote all this out just for my own reference on this big yellow legal pad. And it was getting later in the evening, and I thought, well, I've done good work today. I'm going to turn on the television. And there was I'm not a big television watcher, but there was a show from Geraldo Rivera, who is a sort of half-assed journalist in America, called Geraldo Rivera's Satanism in America. Very dramatic. Had big spinning Baphomets and splashing lights and all these horror stories. And they had this panel of experts who were these 4 or 5 guys that were supposed to be experts in the criminal aspects of the occult on one side. And on the other side, they had Zena LeVay and Michael Aquino. And I started listening to some of these experts who just were going on. And I picked up my list of, things for the Salem trials. And I started just checking things off. Like, here's where we start saying dream evidence is okay in court. And by the time it's done, I'm thinking, wow, we really are about the same level of superstition as was prevalent in America about 300 years ago. And I was pretty much done with the whole thing. And occasionally there would be a question to Zena or to Dr. Aquino, and they would respond rather calmly, generally. But then there was this one investigator, I think his name was Don Webb. Very, very rotund guy. I bet he was about 400 pounds on the hoof. And he was giving this big speech to us. Geraldo, you can't imagine the amount of blood these people use in their sacrifices. It's staggering. I've investigated so many of these cases, and I know where every Satanist in America is and what their crimes are. And at that point, Dr. Aquino said, well, then, as a police officer, why don't you arrest them? Right, the logical question, right? And this guy was just literally kind of like using his arms around, and Geraldo cut to commercial. Well, the next night, I was with some friends, and I said, I've never written anybody a fan letter on TV. But if I knew how to write a letter to this, Dr. Aquino guy, I would love to write a letter because it was the only sensible thing in this whole program. Well, one of the people in this party just gave me this look of, just like evil look. I thought, oh no, she's offended, or she thinks I'm pro-Satanist or whatever. And she walked up to me and she said, you're driving me home tonight. And I said, well, okay. I got out in the car, and we're driving toward her home, and she says to me, she says, are you really serious about writing a letter to Dr. Aquino? And I thought that was odd because in the show it had been Lieutenant Colonel Aquino, not her doctor. Okay. And I said, well, yeah, sure. And she says, well, I'm seeing him next week at the International Conclave of the Temple of Set. I could take the letter for you. This was an astounding moment. I had an interest in the occult for years, but every time I'd met a practitioner, they were in some ways not well-grounded in the world, either because of delusional ideas or delusions of self-importance or delusions of paranoia that there's some magical group coming after them because they're so important.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll write a letter. And I wrote a letter, and she took it. And about a month later, I got a letter back from him, and it was on Green Beret stationery. And it thanked me, and I'd ended the letter with the remark. I said, I don't understand the fundamental paradox of how can you have a group that strengthens individuality. And so that I can't get my head around that one. But I said, you were smart and clever, and my research says this about you. And it was a very cordial letter. And at the very end of the letter, he said, P.S. We don't understand it either. Why don't you join and figure it out for us? Which I thought was a hilarious remark. It wasn't the kind of the kind of thing I would expect. You're a hidden master, or the usual line of bullshit, right? That Occult gave. And the local member that I knew the best was Dr. Stephen Flowers, and he taught at University of Texas, and he taught most of the historical Germanic classes. So if you took class in Old Norse or Old High German or even Old English, even with Dr. Flowers. And I noticed this guy was a serious scholar. He had legitimately peer-reviewed serious books in the field, on one hand. And then he had this, at that time, secret identity. It's not secret anymore, so I'm not revealing anything. But he wrote as Edward Thorson. And he wrote these kind of how you use the runes or practical magic books. And I thought, man, this is the kind of stuff I've always tried to get to. How can you be, you're not leaving your brains at the door. Yeah. You can go and use real research, but you also do real research here. You go and you see, do I get a practical result? So this is the spectrum that this stuff should have. And so I did join the temple. And a few weeks after I joined, it so happened that Dr. Aquino and his wife Lilith came to Austin to visit with Dr. Flowers and his then wife. And they were doing some daily research down at the University of Texas at Austin, which has, for a variety of strange reasons, has all of Crowley's original material. And I had joined, and I went over to meet them, and I was expecting, I had no idea what this would be like. I'd never met someone that was sort of exalted, whatever, leader of a group, and found him to be funny and to the point and tell interesting stories. And I thought, man, this isn't actually a man of actual substance. I would be impressed with this man if I met him not in this particular venue of occultism. And very early on, he was always very good at answering letters. And I had a lot of questions. And then, of course, Dr. Flowers is very good at answering questions. And so I made rapid progress in the Temple of Set, to the extent that 7 years after joining, I was offered the high priesthood and took it for 6 years until I found someone else that I could talk into doing it. So it was interesting because there wasn't a hidden secret. It wasn't a secret of it, and in reality, we're doing this hideous practice, or in reality, we're actually not very smart, or in reality, we don't change our minds if we get new evidence. The temple had always had this vaguely Egyptian aesthetic, not really grounded in good Egyptology. And so early on, I said, well, I'm going to find out what the scholarly basis for this is, because I really rather suspected that Set's a great metaphor, but it's really not the same God as this Egyptian god. And so I read a great deal in the literature, in the current literature in Egyptology. I said, no, there's some actually amazingly good links here that no one's noticed. Mm. And when I would come up with something, I would send a note off to Dr. Aquino, and I'd say, hey, you'll find this in this dissertation, you'll find this in this book. And he immediately updated the Crystal Tablet of Set. He says, hey, this is much better info than I had. And I was like, wow, that's so different than most occultists I dealt with, because they set themselves up as, I am the expert. God talked to me. You must listen, as opposed to, no, here's some new things, and he would cite. And I thought, man, this is a really pleasant process. Now, of course, my teacher, my initiator, Dr. Flowers, is a tremendous academic. And from his initial interaction with Germanic ideas, went on to basically bring about the runic reawakening of the last part of the 20th century. And I've always found him fascinating because he has a lot of critics. People are like, man, this guy's awful. We hate him, and he's a Satanist, blah blah blah. But they still have to use his books. I've read this, and Flowers is correct up to this point. But I think this, I think he's gone off on the deep end here, and he's always like, if you can find an error, I'm very open. Guy's a tremendous linguist. Got to meet his teacher at the University of Texas, Dr. Polome, who's just a linguist, a guy that was just kind of staggeringly smart. And I like the fact that you found a balance where you could be passionate, you could be ecstatic, you could be totally full of the magical moment, but then you also could say, all right, now I'm going to test this against historical record. And it's a tremendous thing. And I started writing about the Greek magical parasite because I was not about to approach the runes because, Dr. Flowers had already written at that point like 20 books. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to get somewhere that he hasn't. But that, sort of my own connection was almost a historical one to start with. But then I found other aspects of the temple, the way it dealt with emotions and development and thought, to be very simpatico, and managed to find that unity. And always, with Dr. Aquino, I always, of course, had tremendous respect, but I always found I always felt very collegial toward. Like, you and I are working at the same thing. You may be working at this level, and I'm right about here, but there's no sense of belittling or, you're a lesser thinker or something. And occasionally would say, hey, this thing you have discovered, that's actually very valuable. And I'm going to try to bring that into the mainstream of study and thinking. One of his last books, he has a book called Mind Star that deals with Egyptian soulcraft. And that largely began as a lecture I gave at a conclave years ago. And then after the lecture, he said, well, what's your source material on this? And I said, well, these things, and here's the overwhelming, problems in the field. And then he went and ran with that a long way and produced his own. And typical of study and thinking, even though he wrote the book, it's not dogma. We have very little, dogma in the temple. It's just like, this seems to be a good model. Give it a spin. Which I like in general about the temple. So there's very, very little that's dogmatic.
That's a very interesting frame, because I think a lot of people have that normal approach when they approach different orders or different groups. It's that authoritarian this way, and it's the only way, and it's almost like when the one part of the psyche or the one part of the brain doesn't see data and then fills it in order to justify it, instead of critically or truly critically being willing to test and evolve and things like that. And I mean, being in the presence of minds like that, what I'm very curious about in terms of that is, when we look at a lot of how general, especially in the New Age, right? We've got so many New Age thinkers or people that are out there that have read a few books and now thinks that they're gurus, haven't really gotten out of that frame of the previous tradition. They've not really actually pushed themselves through those edges. I'm curious in two very specific kind of questions in that one. One, with your having the opportunity to work with Stephen Flowers for so long, and getting to understand his approach to the study, scholarly almost, of occultism and that testing and because he had that beautiful division. He had the pure esoteric runology under Thorson, and then he had the more academic component of it. And he was very, very much advanced in how he presented, and what he's done for the field really revolutionized it, brought it to a whole new level. Taking that psychological tool or that approach or that strategy, in comparison to what you see is the common issues of the day of these layman occultists approaching the subject, one grimoire assuming it is gospel. What are some key distinctions or key problems that you've come across in that, and like how to overcome it as well?
Well, for most people, their connection with occultism is that of entertainment, right? It's great for the imagination. It's at a slightly deeper level than watching a really good movie. Or sometimes that's actually as far as it ever gets. And it's not because of a weakness in their psyche, like, oh, this is regrettable. It's because we live in a society that views, in general, being deeply interested in something is suspicious. If you're not basically interested in making money, or consuming very sort of standardized prepackaged fantasies, there's something wrong with you. You're slightly kooky. And then for the average occultist, they get beyond that. They're like, well, okay, I'm thinking about some things that's not everyone is thinking about, but they don't want to go very far into the ocean, right? They've walked in enough, and it's coming up, and it's hitting their knees, and they're having their great day at the beach. But they don't want to go out to a further place because they realize this may deeply concern me. This may frighten me. This may estrange me from people. Or, and we've all had this, I certainly had this a great deal in life, you realize I'm going to have to make some changes in myself to deal with the phenomena that I'm dealing with. I can't be as shallow. I can't be as prejudiced. I can't be as lazy. And like, well, maybe I'd like a belief system that I can still be all those things. I just like the thrill part. So you'll see these people that they're thrilled by the unknown, but they don't want to do anything that actually involves doing anything with it. I was thinking about that some years ago. I was at a meeting of several UFO groups in Austin, and I had come to cover it as a journalist. And I was talking to some of the people there, and some of them would proudly tell me how many books they have. I've got 80 books on this subject. And so I said, I've got some books on this. And then first thing I would ask is, so who do you know? Because, I have not read a great deal about UFOs, but there were some things that fascinated me. So I started writing John Keel and Jacques Vallée right after I'd finished their books. I said, hey, that was a great book. Can you kind of help me with this? And they, particularly Keel, loved to write back, right? Keel would send me these long letters. And they, well, I've never done that. I'm too shy. Oh, okay. Even though he's kind of spent like about $600-700 worth of stuff for these books you have. And then at one point at the convention, someone said, jokingly, that there was actually a UFO you could see outside. If you go outside, you could actually see one in the sky. This strange light was going on. And I noticed, to my utter surprise, nobody got up. Not a single person, because they didn't want to be made fun of, even in a group that's supporting this notion.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not getting up out of my chair and walking out to the parking lot and looking up, I mean, I ran over to the window, and I thought the guy was probably full of crap. But, if not, this might be the moment, right? And that was a very revealing notion, which was whatever you're interested in, you don't want it to become more real. You don't want it to have some depth, but you love the entertaining aspect. And some publishers, I think Traditions does not do this, which is one of the reasons I love them. Some publishers promote that in their writers. Say, hey, how many books can you get out of this series? And let's see if we can make like a whole new number. Even if there's nothing going on in your own life that supports this. And there was one occult writer, I'm not going to mention his name publicly because I'm not interested in shaming this guy, but he was writing some books on runic mysteries back when Dr. Flowers was the acquisitions editor for Llewellyn for a fairly brief time. That did not work out well. And he wrote this letter to Dr. Flowers saying, I'm really thrilled about this next book. I've even done some of the rituals. We just sat and looked at the letter, like, you've even done some of these things you're telling people to go do. Like that's like your moment of you're good. And I'd be like, I would be grossly embarrassed. And you know, I'd say, yeah, of course, anything I've done, I've tried different things, and you know, not shared the stuff that I have that doesn't work. Or if I share it, I say, several of my friends or students have done this. Doesn't work for me, but here it is. And again, it's just that matter of commitment, because once you make the commitment, you're going to start drifting away from mainstream thinking. And we are taught again and again and again not to do that. That used to be easy. You know, when I was a child in America with 3 television stations and 2 political parties, and basically you could be a Christian, an atheist, or a weirdo. That was kind of your spectrum, where we put Jews into the Christian category where I grew up. Then it was really clear what the common values were. Now, the only common value that people have in America is, I need to acquire more money. Money will be the source of either happiness or safety. And things that might interfere with that, like might make you a less attractive employee, are generally not to be done or to be really quiet about. It's interesting. I mean, throughout my career, I'll be dealing with academics or with administrators of like some important companies, and then they will admit as a huge secret, yes, I'm really into this. You know, and it's said with the kind of tone you would expect for a sexual confession.
Oh.
Yeah, I do that too. You know, why is that there a level of even shame about that? But then some people also learn to use that, right? That if you can pass that, that's part of your first gateway, right? If you can pass that and say, well, I don't know, I'm going to go look at this stuff, and that may make me weird. That's a big gateway. That's a bigger gateway for a modern human than I've lost my soul and I'm going to go be with the devil.
Well, that's very true. That's very true. It's easier to like be the edgelord or the extreme judgment in that, because it's almost cool in a certain way, or it's trending in certain areas, versus being willing to look like an idiot or test. I like the idea of being top heavy on intellect versus top heavy on experience, where it creates almost like that analysis paralysis, where you're so convinced you're going to be right on this intellectual pedestal that you've created of the art or the idea, that you're almost not willing to shatter the crystal palace and meet the person in real life, test the idea and the ritual. It's easier to hold on that the archetype is super powerful than actually question or challenge or go out and try, so to speak, that entire piece of work. But going into that, so it's a very fascinating kind of problem that I think we see very much in society. And I think in that sense, there's almost like a maturing in a weird way that happens with should we call it the spiritual outlaw of the left-hand path, or that spiritual practice. You describe stages almost, or almost like development tiers of like these, what I would say is a scale of maturity, you know, for the vampire, but also for the occultist in that. What do you see that as when somebody actually now starts to step on this path? They kind of are willing to critically look at themselves, or critically challenge some of these ideas and practice them and explore them. What does that progression line usually look like? And I'm kind of also subtexting that a little bit. And the subtext around that is, I'm curious to what it looks like from a Temple of Set point of view.
There is a problem in dealing with esoteric matters, because the moments of change initially happen when you're alone, and happen either under times of great emotional stress, or times where you're seeking this through some ritual or meditative practice. And then you have that question, how do I fit into the world? How do I reintegrate? Now, there's two great scholars in the last century that did a lot of work with this. Arnold van Gennep wrote a book, which in English is Rites of Passage, which you just should basically read. And he looked at initiatory societies cross-culturally and discovered that there's a series of steps that would show up, whether it's a tribal initiation in Africa or a Masonic initiation in New York. And the states were the same. And number one, there's isolation. You stop being part of the matrix. You unplug in some way. You spend time with yourself. You're quiet. You're introspective. Then there's liminality, where weird things begin to happen. You're in a place where now things aren't the way they were. Mm. And then the final step would be reintegration. You come back into the tribe, and with this new knowledge, you have new roles and responsibilities, and you're never the same as before, but it's expected that you will give to the tribe, you'll give to the village, you'll give to your nation based on this higher level of evolution. And this system also is true for the Temple of Set. Now, the other scholar that did great work on this was his student, a guy named Victor Turner. And Victor Turner began studying groups that go through initiation. And he discovered there's a moment of bonding, of brotherhood. Hey, we've both been through this. Mm. And so we hold on to a slightly different reality than everyone holds on to. And as a consequence, I have feelings of love, affection, brother, sisterhood toward these people. The temple has learned to, over the years, utilize these things. The tough thing is I can't say the day that you're going to have your initiatory breakthrough. I can't say, well, that's going to be next Tuesday because what's going on now? Mercury's in retrograde and blah, 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 moon phase is going on. And if you read this book, that's going to happen. Because when it occurs to you, when you have your biggest change, it may not be something you're expecting. Mm. But you then have to do a couple of things. Be open to the change, be skeptical afterward, and then ask yourself the big question, so what? How did that matter? Most people in the New Age never get to so what. Mm. They're happy with whatever however they perceive the phenomena. Mm. I had, God talked to me. Cool, great. He talks to a lot of people, a lot of different names, languages, what was he wearing, whatever. But, and that's it. They're good. They're like, that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm going to deal with initiation of two people, and I'm going to start with Stephen Flowers. I'm talking about how Stephen Flowers began his roots, as it were. When he was in college at the University of Texas at Austin, his girlfriend was a local witch, and they were a member of a group called the Nexium Collegium. And the Nexium Collegium had a great theory, which was we'll get people from a lot of different groups, and they'll come in and show us what they do, and we'll talk about it. I mean, that's a great theory. Ralph Tegmeyer did the same thing back in Berlin, back in the day. It's great. You get people that speak different languages, different arcane languages, and say, hey, this is what's going on. Anyway, the Nexium Collegium, there was a guy that came and put a show on Austin claiming to be a Tibetan monk, which was odd because he's kind of clearly a white guy. And the leader of the Nexium Collegium had a vision that night. She says, I realized we were both lovers in Atlantis, and I'm going to go and we're going to hook up again. And at that time, Dr. Flowers, of course, wasn't Dr. Flowers, at that time, freshman Stephen Flowers was a journalist, right? Journalism major. Wow, this is a good story. This is going to work out well. So he and his girlfriend and the coven leader, they drive off to the home of the Tibetan monk, Norbu Chen. You can look him up now. He's kind of a great guy. And he lived as a Texas roughneck, meaning he worked in the oil fields when there was work. And the rest of the time, he was a Tibetan monk, which is great work if you can get it. And they go and they knock on the door, and she rushes up and she starts telling about their previous past in Atlantis, and he, sends them home. Leave. I'm going to call the police. You're clearly a nut job. So they have this drive back, and really quiet in the car. The coven leader is too embarrassed to speak. Her disciple is really embarrassed. Stephan is almost falling asleep in the back of the car, and then they're driving along through the Lost Pines region of Texas, and suddenly Stephan hears a word spoken clearly in his ears. Runa. That was it. No, nothing else, and he was minoring in German, so he recognized the name. It must have something to do with the runes.
Mm-hmm.
And he did what made him who he is. The next day, he went down to the University of Texas Library, and he checked out every book they had on the runes. And it's not like today, because now there'd be a lot in pretty much any library. They were largely academic texts in English or German about these characters used by Germanic tribes and their historical placement. And one, completely how this got here, who knows, paperback book from Germany called Runenmagie by Spiceberger, which was basically, here's how you do rune magic. And then he has the two things. He's got this huge pile of academic stuff, and he has this small book by a member of the Turntass attorney about how you meditate on runes. That's it. And that's all he took. He's starting with this. He's like, oh, what do I need to go and do? Now, this is very different than the average New Age initiate who maybe has 20 experiences, 100 experiences. Literally, a God spoke to him one word, didn't even know the language, right? Eventually he figured out it was Old Norse. And so he goes and he gets degrees and he speaks to scholars, but then he also tracks down the esoteric side of things. And what's interesting with this wasn't a plan. His plan wasn't, I'm going to have a moment of revelation. But as we'll always discover in our lives, whenever the moment is, you're literally in the right place. You just don't know it. You're totally unaware. And what Stephen Flowers didn't know is that one of the best academic runologists in the world happened to be teaching at the University of Texas. And Dr. Edgar Pullman. And he wasn't even teaching, this is a great part, wasn't teaching one of the Germanic classes. Pullman did so many. He was teaching the Sanskrit class.
Oh, wow.
So as Edward's looking through, oh, no, Edgar Pullman. Oh, well, that's that guy over in that hall. I'm going to go talk to him. And then ran with it. The great esotericist has to be ready when the signal comes. Say, okay, that's here. Yep, that's pretty much a signal. I wasn't on drugs. No one seems to be manipulating me. All the things you should be worried about. And it's very confusing to me. I don't understand what to do with it. I had a similar experience in my own life. I'd been a member of the Temple Set for years. One day at one of the conclaves, one was in Sacramento, California. I was flying home, not to my home, but to my mom's home, because she had told me that she had a minor surgery that day. Well, my mother, God rest her soul, was a complete fucking liar. It was a terrible, huge, major surgery. And she was afraid to tell me this. And so I'm going to the hospital thinking, this will be a small thing. They're wheeling her back out of surgery. She's white. There are tubes coming out of her body. I'm like, oh my God, this is not in any way psychologically prepared. And she and I start chatting, and she talks about the hospital that we're in, which was built on the site that her father used to be a sharecropper. And she talked about experiences she had had as a child there, including, a moment that her life had been saved after an accident. And I also had experiences on the same land, unaware of its history, back when I was first kind of playing at the idea of doing magic. And we talked about 1 a.m, and finally the hospital people said, look, your mom needs to rest. You need to go home. You look awful. I walk out of the hospital. I have no idea if my mom's even going to be alive tomorrow. I'm standing there. I just say to the dark sky, I said, look, obviously the spot is really important. If there's something I'm supposed to be getting here, can you tell me now? Because I don't know how many times I'm going to be back here. nothing was going to happen. Started my car, driving home, and then suddenly I had a book in my hand, a very short, revealed text. Not what I was seeking, not really helpful for the moment, but I knew, hey, write it out, stick it in my suitcase, come back to it when I can. Mm. And that eventually led to the series of phenomena that allowed me to obtain what we would call in the Temple of Set the degree of magus. In other words, meaning that I think a god has a job for me, which is actually much more humbling than you think, and everything else. But it's because I realized I have to pay attention to this, I have to be skeptical to this, and then I've got to ask myself, so what? I've seen a lot of people that they will have some revelatory moment, and the next thing they do, it's on Facebook 2 hours later. Why? But you haven't processed this at all, and you're making sure no one's going to process it. And that's because we don't have an initiatory tradition in the modern world. People don't know what to do with this stuff.
That's a very, very, very apt point. I think it's been made, especially even in the male development movement, that entire initiatory process is missing. It's absent. And you have a lot of people that aren't growing up. And it's such a nice statement or a view in that sense, because I reflect on the classic old fundamental psychological 6 human needs or more even, where we look at human significance and the need for significance. And to me, it's almost like the need of significance is a lesser psychic manifestation of our spiritual probabilities. And if we're unable to meet a sense of significance from within ourselves, we're constantly pursuing it from others, and hence that moment of seeking channeled knowledge as if it's fact or experience when it's purely inspiration, but preaching it out as gospel. It's about as effective as how Joseph Campbell's "Follow Your Bliss" may be useful for a seeker, but terrible advice for somebody addicted to heroin. It's there is context, and I love that, like, that critical fact, because that's again like the other typical almost religious ideal that kind of comes from the old right or the old other side of things as well, which is take things on faith and kind of oversaturate. And it's almost like a yin-yang imbalance. Like they're willing to like go super critical, but then the second the good goes, they don't want to question it. They don't want to challenge. They don't want to get out of that moment and say, what is the actual practical, that phrase, when we fail, we tend to ponder, when we party, everything's just good. And that is a bit of an oversight or an issue or a challenge. But when that progression happened, when I start getting into that journey, because you said nicely that series of phenomena that then occurs as a result of this, the inspiration, but also the willingness to then act on the inspiration. And I think I have my own translations or my own terms that I use to describe this component of the psyche that pulls us back to the old world or the old paradigm, that stops us from kind of crossing the threshold into that gnosis. And you have an idea, and I'm not sure if it's yours or it's from the Temple of Set or where, but it's a reference of the social parasite and the context of the social parasite. And just there's a few revelatory moments for me in how you're describing as we progress in this manifestation, how it comes up and almost pulls us back into that Stephen. Can you explain the social parasite, and especially how to identify and overcome it in this process?
Well, as primates, right, we have a big portion of our brains set up so that we can relate to other primates. And we have understandings of what certain social laws are. The problem is that's not really thinking in our head when that comes up. That's just a rule that we've learned. Now, most of these rules are very, very good. The rule that tells me to stop at a stop sign is a good rule. I don't want it to decide, 17 times a day, do I stop? Nope, I just stop. But you can notice the social parasite. I noticed it a couple of years ago. I had to do, I would periodically be on this large parking lot about 4:30 in the morning. I was it. There was no one for miles, right? And there was stop signs on it. And I would stop every time. and the humor of that hit me. Like there's not another car within 5 miles of here. I am in no danger. But I'm like, no, that's part of my programming. We have programming that makes us relate to authority in certain ways. We have programming that makes us consider avoiding embarrassment at all costs, or what is polite, or where can I go with certain things. And yet, we also literally have the life experience that shows us that some of our best experiences come from when we have not paid attention to the programming. Maybe it's when we're meeting our significant other and, we push things way too far on one of the dates, and that worked out well. Or we we went and read about something that was a totally forbidden topic, or we struck up a conversation with someone that we were in awe to speak to. The social parasite is there so that a large, free, open access society can function. So that we have a whole degree of, I know I can trust most of the people around me to a certain extent. I know that I can go and ask for help to a certain extent. I know that there are certain ideas that are common that I have to live with in whatever way. A lot of initiation comes from observing this pre-packaged idea of what is correct and not correct, and just saying, well, I'm going to take my chances. But then learning that doesn't mean you can just do anything that kind of crosses your mind. Or maybe your impulse might not be the best impulse. Say you take something, that's a kind of a good vampiric moment, and you decide, I'm going to visit quietly a historic graveyard on the night of a full moon, and just to walk around. I'm not trying to talk to dead people. I'm just there, and you are undoubtedly breaking a law to do that. There's no question that if some cop drives up or someone calls you in, nope, you're gonna face a consequence. Do you decide you will do that despite the laws, but are you going to then do it in a way that is reasonable? Like you wear dark clothing, and you're not carrying your cell phone around shining a light, and you're not acting in an inappropriate fashion. And then just see how does that change things? The social parasite shows up a lot of times and can be extraordinarily daunting, because it's like, I can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? Are you worried about consequence? No, I couldn't go do that. Like, all right, maybe start there and see what happens if you do that. And I'm not talking about violence. I'm not talking about theft. I'm not talking about anything that is an ethical being you wouldn't do. Now, at various times in my life, I've discovered some of the power in this. In college, I was in a play called Miss Reardon Drinks a Little, or House of Blue Leaves. House of Blue Leaves. And there's a moment in that play where a man in a white coat, who was me, comes in and takes this crazy woman off stage. It's a very minor part. But I had the white coat checked out to me from the development department. And the school I went to, Rice University, is next door to MD Anderson Cancer Research, the biggest cancer hospital in the world. And one day, I just put on my white coat and walked over there. And I just walked through every door. Now, I completely was going to say, hey, if someone said this is authorized personnel, I was going to say, oh my God, I'm sorry, where do I need to go? And I walked around, and people would signal me, I help move beds. And then I went home and had this total moment of, all my life, I've always assumed that if I saw someone in a hospital wearing a white coat, that meant something other than they had a white coat. And suddenly all these social realities, I wasn't doing it to score drugs or
Anything.
pass myself off as an oncologist and give advice, or just literally walking around to see what's in these rooms that you're not allowed to walk around in. And that's one of the moments I also became really aware that the social parasite is there because we're also expecting everybody else to play with the rules. And then when we encounter someone that's not playing with the rules, sometimes they take terrible advantage of us. Or sometimes it's just things we can't even begin to fathom. The social parasite is what keeps us from becoming a certain level of magician. It might be very difficult to say, no, I'm not going to Uncle Ralph's birthday party because I want to do a ritual that night. Now, probably shouldn't say because you're doing a ritual that night, but the social parasite saying, hey, it's your job to be down there. That doesn't mean family obligations are not real. It just means that where is this voice coming from inside yourself that tells you certain things? Did you make this decision? Does this decision make sense to you? What happens if you just don't play along?
I think it's one of those elusive obviouses, right? I remember when I was in media and digital agencies in my earlier days, and I got into shooting music videos and minor film production and things like that. And then I would get invitations to festivals and events. And I'd immediately get backstage access simply because I had a camera hanging around my neck. And I tested the theory and found out that I could go to, I'm not advising this for everybody, but I could go to major events, walk in for free just because I had a camera on me and it was considered the norm. And these rules that we play, and I think a motivational coach once said it nicely, referred to it as the counter obvious, whereas these obvious assumptions, these models that we take for granted in reality, and we play by these rules, not realizing that they're not even rules anymore. They don't actually exist. They're almost like phantoms of outmoded traditions and ideas that we're still operating with. Same as the approach anxiety in men, that's still a biological reaction to a degree of certain context, but will willingly jump out of a plane more likely than a young man would approach an attractive woman. It's just the customs and the rules and these conditions are oftentimes they're the social context that don't have a frame. But that makes me curious because you said it quite nicely with the opening of that somebody that's a little bit further. Let me rephrase it a bit. Somebody that's a little bit further in that progression line, they can almost use that in a manipulative fashion. They can use, because they probably do look as if they are magical. They look like they are living a fantastical, secret occult life simply because they are not operating, or they've seen through the matrix. They've seen through those limits and they're operating at a different level. So it does seem to those in the matrix as if there is an occult or supernatural magical force that they must have over their life, because how else are they capable of doing this? And I think that there's a healthy aspect to that, and there's an unhealthy aspect to that. When we look at this frame from the vampire perspective, and we look at this context of energy, because that's a very strong energy dynamic as well. It's an understanding of what if that is pulling my power, giving me power. And as that awareness comes into the vampire and they start to progress up the lines, what does that look like? I mean, you go into lots of exercises and details, but for the conversation, what would you describe that stages of maturing as a vampire and that awareness to be like, as well as the understanding of energy outside of the typical occult metaphysical context of it?
Well, I think one of the things that most people, they may understand intuitively, but they don't understand intellectually, is that energy is always about exchange. If someone or something is giving you energy, they're wanting something back. And if you are processing the energy and returning it in a more refined form, this is completely acceptable, if that's what everybody in the room thinks is going on. What we tend not to have is that we have very low-level energy exchanges go on in our society where no one asks our permission to take this energy, and then what they're giving us back is pure crap. I can walk into a room in anywhere in North America, maybe in the world. I don't know if this is a worldwide phenomenon, and I can hum the first 3 notes of the McDonald's theme song, and then I can say, "What'd you all think of?" Everybody in the room, "McDonald's." And I said, "Does it bother you that part of your brain has been leased to these people? Did you sign something over for that?" And then they'll give me the look of, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, obviously I can control your brain by doing ba-da-ba-ba-ba. And I actually control what's going on inside your head." Isn't that maybe a little disturbing? We have a lot of drains on our energy, and then we have a lot of people that don't do anything useful with the energy. In America, in the U.S., we have a group of people who have no talent, and they're a family called the Kardashians. And the Kardashians are exactly a very, 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 very media-soaked family. And you probably have seen pictures of them. And you may probably even know what parts of their body look like. That's surprising that you would know this. And they became famous because their dad was a lawyer, and he was a lawyer for a man named O.J. Simpson. And O.J. Simpson stayed at their house for a few months when he was under investigation for killing his wife. And because of that, they became famous. They have no talent. They don't act. They don't sing. They don't write. They're not actually as good looking as they think they are. And we all believe it's a cult of fame, and people want to meet them, and will tell the story of how they met them. That's also a vampiric exchange, except what do we see? Are they taking that energy in and then using it for self-improvement? I don't think so. Are they becoming immortal? Well, maybe they are, but perhaps not in the form they want to be immortal. Do they give something back to their followers that's more than some vague gratification, titillation? That's it. But we build a whole society based, on these things. And that can be, when I talk about the energy mix, I'm not talking about people that are different. Everyone in the world is a vampire. Everyone in the world takes in and gives back energy. That's part of the human condition. What most people don't know is, how can you increase the energy, and can you make any decisions what you have with it, other than giving it back in the form that is demanded of you? If I go to the theater, I go to watch a magician, whatever, what's demanded of me is my money to get in and my applause. And what I get back is entertainment. That's seems to be fair all the way around. I point out that people can choose when to take in energy, when to expel energy, and then when to be invisible. Invisibility is a really important skill. There's times when that's a really, really useful thing. Some of it is just, kind of situational awareness. How do I not be noticed? Or when do I want to be noticed? When do I want to dominate a meeting? Now, this tends to largely be curious in erotic senses, right? Because that's such a powerful notion. And in the myth of the vampire, particularly the way it's gone, say post-Stoker, it's almost entirely erotic. Bram Stoker wrote the whole book because he had a crush on his boss, Irving, right? He wanted Irving to notice him. So and had trouble because the Victorian era, and you didn't just kind of walk up to someone and say, "Hello, let's pretend there's no sodomy laws. Worked out okay for a while. Okay, we can do that." No, but there's a tremendous eroticism in the vampire, and then that's why it's so popular in film and TV and music videos, and comic books and everything else. And that's an easy form of power to understand when we're young and good-looking. And it becomes hard to understand as we become less good-looking. The power of taking in and letting out energy does not give you any knowledge of how to use it. But if you are careful, you can, in your empowered moments, say, I'm going to use part of this power to develop a wisdom of how to deal with this.
Okay.
How do I draw this attention? Now, we can see, I see this happen fairly often. I live in the city of Austin, Texas, and it has one of the largest OTO lodges anywhere, the Oro Templi Orientalis. And I notice over the years that there's any number of very attractive young women that join. And of course, they get immediate attention because they're extremely attractive, and most of the members are, men that can't get laid. And so there's a tremendous, kind of energy. And then I see most of these, not all, most of these women, this is their downfall. Because they go for a few months, a few years of being the total center of attention and given prominent places and rituals and being listened to every word they say, to then suddenly, there's someone hotter now. Now, there are people who then make the vampiric connection, saying, while I have this energy, what am I using it for? And what's the long-term goal here? How can I take this moment of attention and use it? This happens to artists. This can happen to people in the most mundane of jobs. They get energy because they became the supervisor. And if they're an idiot, they think, I got this energy because I'm smarter. No, you got the energy now. What are you going to do with it? And that's something there's not an answer for in conventional society. Conventional society either says, well, you use your energy to get more energy, looking out for number one. I'm going to be tough. I'm going to be heartless, whatever. No. Why? Because then you're an empowered asshole, and eventually someone more empowered than you will take you down. Or I'm going to use this energy to increase my power and pleasure and perception. I'm going to use it to meet people that I find interesting and exciting and wonderful. And once you make that very simple choice, the world will change in what it will offer you. And it will change in amazing ways. Years ago, decades ago, I had become interested in fourth way work associated with Cvlt. And I was open, and have been open for years, to meeting interesting people. That's a very important skill for the vampire to have. And so I was invited, as were a very few number of people, to meet one of the last people that had worked with him in France. And I actually got to go and spend an evening with someone that had literally worked with Cvlt, and she said some amazing things. And I'm smart enough to know that it's not because I am great or chosen or wonderful, it's because I was using my power then to say, I am open to this. Now, when I come home from that, I'm going to spend time writing down everything she said and making my notes, because whatever I've summoned to myself, I have to turn that later into yet another form of energy.
Again, the so what moment.
Yeah, so what?
So what?
I get it.
Yeah, what am I doing with it? It's so apt. I think I made a social remark recently, and I was looking at the effects of Instagram and social media in general. And the thing that was funny for me was watching individuals that don't run businesses. They're not service professionals. They're not authors or artists. They're just random individuals, maybe with a family, with a typical Instagram page, still paying money for posts. They're paying to have their posts seen, yet they are not leading it anywhere. They're not models. They're not selling it. It's just the
right.
need for that energy, that need for it. But there's no one under. It shows almost the parasite or the victim in a way being vampirically pulled by where Instagram here would be, or social media or others would actually be the one draining that energy and pulling that from them. And I like this context because it breaks out of the very typical ceremonial magician one where I'm only building up the energy inside of the ritual or the ceremonial chambers versus recognizing that all life is a consistent development, a raising of energy, an exchange of energy. And then again, what do I do with it? Do I just sit in glorification of my own ego and my own moment, getting high on the fumes of my energy, so to speak, or am I reinvesting it in a constructive way? I think that is it's an alchemical process that leads us to that. And I have a slight frustration because of our time running out, and there's so much more I want to ask you. So I'm going to try to be articulate with some questions so I can get the most out of your mind with the time I still have. In the book, you speak a bit of helping and working with Stephan with the transition that Lilith Aquino was going through before she found her word, and helping her to come into that place. This transition spiritually and psychologically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but part of my perceptual interpretation of the work is you outline 9, I think, words inside of the book, and there are the stages, and anyone that's listened to the review or watched or got a copy of the book, there is the mention of it. And you go through a lot of the greats and that progression of their contribution to the occult world. It almost seems to me as that is their internal logos, that word ultimately becomes the internal logos, or the persona vehicle that contains that body of work, that collection of principles or vibrations. How does that look like? Could you talk about that journey, what it was like for Lilith and guiding somebody through that experience? And the reason I'm asking that is because I am curious for the individual that may have just tapped on this video because something called them to it. And maybe they've been working a lot of systems for a long time, and they're at a spiritual crossroad, or they're at some awakening within themselves it's outside of the social norm. They've gone almost outside of the social parasite, and they're in the spectrum where they have the esoteric basis, maybe in ideas, but they don't necessarily know how to ground it in and to get through that space or what it means. Could you talk about that and help us understand that process a bit?
Well, in Lilith's case, she had been a high-ranking initiate in the temple for decades, and she's the Grand Master of the Order of the Vampyre, and she had the big question: what do I do with my energy? Now, Lilith has a tremendously commanding presence, which you may have seen just because in talk shows or something, but just in person, she's tremendously commanding. She still is tremendously commanding, and she began to feel, because in the Order of the Vampyre there was a lot of magic related to shape-shifting, traditional kind of explorations of the werewolf or the vampire who can become a bat or a wolf or other things like this. She began to feel a tremendous sympathy toward animal life.
Okay.
And she began doing a lot of volunteerism with animals. And she approached it very magically. I remember one time we were at a ceremony where we took oaths, what we're going to do during the year. And she said, I have been working with preserving the North American timber wolf for years. This year, I will hold a North American timber wolf puppy in my hands. And that was their oath. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't can't really call up, hey, you got that puppy? But then sure enough, she fulfilled that by the end of the year, because she had learned that when you reach a certain level of power, you can make oaths, and they happen. They're the law, which is then really humbling when you make the wrong oath.
No doubt.
And she had said that she had thought for some time that this was an important aspect of initiation, that everyone needs to go through this or should have that opportunity. And she was looking for some way to have some group to do this. And about that time, Stephen Flowers was reading a book by Jocelyn Godwin called Arctos, the polar myth. And Stephen realized that the name, if Greek were much more regular than it actually is, for she-bear would be Arcte. That would be the name of the Great Dipper. And so he mentioned, well, what if you just called the group that? Arcte's Avengers. She said, oh, that's wonderful, right? Because the Great Dipper is the constellation historically associated with Set. So all Setians recognize that one really well. And later, we've had some very good Greek scholars point out that's a neologism that actually doesn't exist in Greek, but we gave her the wrong information, so hopefully she doesn't find that out and turn me into a toad. But she said, as I had the concept, as I had this word, it was very focusing, because I could deal with the word in a magical way. I could chant it, I could use it in incantation. I could research the myths of the Great Bear, because there's myths of the Great Bear in any civilization in the Northern Hemisphere. I could actually think about this in terms of how I was giving my money to some of these groups. I'll say it's from Arcday. And there began to be a large number of coincidences piling up in her life. So like, clearly this is actually a doorway. I'm going to walk through the doorway, because on the other side of the doorway is the question I need. One doesn't want answers in life. He wants a really good question. And when she did this, I was high priest of Set, and we discussed this. I said, well, do you want to receive this in terms of formal recognition of the temple? I said, because the downside is, do you want a group that's already kind of, infamous, saying we're interested in animal welfare? That may not work out well. Think about that. And she eventually said yes, and we put this forward. There's only one vote in the entire Temple of Set that requires a unanimous vote, and it's the vote to become a magus. The ruling body all must vote yes. If one person says no, you're done. And it's a hard vote to get. And she got it. Now, the voting is not what gives you the state of being. The Temple of Set cannot confer a state of being. It can confirm a state of being. But when that happens, everyone realizes that you are speaking with authority, and it's like having a spotlight shown on you then, whether you want to or not, for the rest of your initiatory career. Observing this change in her was easy, because I could see how did her teaching affect other people. I mean, who cares what your teaching does for you, right? I figured this out. Great, good, yay. I shared what I'm thinking and doing with other people, and we had Setians who were joining, the ocean warrior groups and so forth, and going out and grabbing whaling ships, and that was a big change from being like the engineers they had been the year before. And I'm like, okay, well that's huge, because they weren't doing it for brownie points. Well, Lilith said, yeah, great. They're like, I've got to change this. This is so important to me. It was interesting to watch how she became this living ideal, much as years before her husband had become the living idea of the Egyptian verb that we pronounce kefer in the temple, to become, or Crowley with his word of thalima. And this change does not mean you have all the answers. It just means you've got one question, and that's the one question you have the rest of your life. How does everything relate to this? When you undergo a huge magical change, it changes everything around you, your life, your family, the way the world treats you, good and bad, and sometimes miraculously. And so I'm going to leave you with a story that I love from years ago. Years ago, I was having dinner once with Robert Anton Wilson, who's a guy that wrote the Illuminatus trilogy and several other kind of wonderful books. And one of Bob's hobby horses is the 23 phenomena. If you start noticing the number 23, it shows up all the time. And the night before, he had been at a bookstore in Dallas and was talking to the owner whom I knew. And this guy says, I figured this out, Mr. Wilson. When I first read about this 23 thing, I'd start seeing it everywhere. But then I realized it's just because I'm paying attention. And Bob said, yeah, that's it. That's the whole of the thing. So I thought it was some like mystical power controlling my life and like it's the biggest thing ever. And I realized, no, it's just a coincidence. And Bob said, good, you've achieved enlightenment. And at that point, the bill for the dinner came at the pizza place they were, and they handed it to him. And it was $23. And this guy, and Bob said, he got so angry at me. He thought I was actually worried. He was like, how did you do that? So, no, the thing we just talked about. No, this can't be a coincidence. This is happening now. And Bob's like, I gotta go back to my hotel. Nice night. You don't have to drive me. I can get a cab. There's a moment when you walk through a magical door, it does change the rules for you, but it doesn't change the rules in a bigger sense. So if you achieve a word that you live by, in Lilith's case, Arcte, or Crowley's Thelema, or Anton LaVey's Indulgence, outside you will still look a little crazy when people get far enough away, even though then the coincidences of your life become incredibly and overwhelmingly amazing.
That's profound. That's thank you very much for that context. I hope I have enough time for you for one closing question.
Okay.
And it's something you and I kind of like little hinted at before we started this conversation. And I feel that somebody that's listening has gone through quite an adventure, quite a journey with us. And one of the things that I want to bring to the discussion point before we kind of close, and it's something that I've heard you comment on, and I feel that you're quite authoritative, given your experience and your background, to talk about the subject very well. And to me, it's the eternal kind of debate about left hand, right hand path and what it means in context. And I had a conversation with somebody once, and I said that to me, to a degree, there's a fundamental value in both, in the sense of that they're almost two sides of the coin. And I use the model of a relationship, stating that in a relationship, love is the unity, and that similarity, that likes, that creates the rapport between two people that allows us to enter a relationship. But if that's all it is, then the passion, it's not going to sustain the fundamental breeding capacity of that relationship is going to be pretty weak, or just the energy that compels it. And that's, to me, the left-hand path in a certain way as well, is that it's the separation, it's the duality of it, because that is also where we, in the alchemical sense, get to generate the polarities of attraction that has the greatest energy in the pulse. So I see the value of both. I'd like to get your understanding or your interpretation of the left-hand path specifically in these contexts.
Well, the term left-hand path, which came into English when Bulwer Lytton wrote the novel Zanawai, he took a Sanskrit term, Bama Marg, the path of the left, or ultimately the path of the woman. And it is it's a path of command, whereas the right-hand path is the path of union. A good practitioner of the right-hand path, and there are some very good practitioners, they ultimately just want to be at one with whatever they perceive God to be. Thy will be done. The left-hand path practitioner says, all right, I want my will to be done. The interesting contrast is that as you go along these lines, you're approaching the same absolute. Because if I am the most godlike person can be, and I'm making commands from that area and so forth, then I have also evolved morally, and I have deep consideration about consequence, and I'm very focused as a developed human being. Or if I have totally submitted to the will of God, I'd have to really think about, what does the will of God mean? This distinction became very important in a really funny way in the year 1966, because left-hand path had always been used as a pejorative term in occultism. Like Aleister Crowley, when Austin Osman Spare said, I don't want to have sex with you, he went and wrote an article denouncing Austin Osman Spare as a brother of the left-hand path. He's holding himself back from union. Union in this case being, bending over. And it was a phrase that would be, Madame Blavatsky said it of Randolph. Oh, he's a left-hand path magician. I am the good path. And then in 1966, Anton LaVey, in a moment of sheer brilliance, said, yeah, that's me. The one you're scared of, me. I'm the one. I am the evil. Me. I'm the evil black magician. And it's that powerful. Let's see. When the Church of Satan had 205 members, he got his picture on Life magazine and was invited to talk, invited to bless the Tonight Show in America. Really, most cults with 250 people don't get that.
No.
But the moment he said, "It's me, I'm Satan," people that take this now as a serious thing, they may start here. They may start with the "it scares my friends and family," but they eventually have the same questions of, how do I act as an ethical, responsible person? What is power? What should I do with power? What is my legacy on this planet? And in both these paths, they lead to the same absolute. We have more trouble with that in the West than, say, the places came from in Hinduism. In Hinduism, you can go to a Shiva temple, and there can be the complete left-hand path, a gory, scary-looking guy next to the guy in the suit that's totally like this, but they don't doubt each other's spirituality. They may doubt each other's dress choice and smell, but not each other's spirituality.
That's very well put. Thank you very much. That's such a good frame, and I also think a very mature kind of experienced expression on it. Again, because I find that a lot of people look at it from the same comment earlier. They're still trying to meet psychological needs or run social paradigms, and they're not breaking past that to look at the common, the shared, and the individual even in that context as well. Don, I just want to leave the audience with something. I believe that you're doing a bit of a workshop coming out in October of a class or something. That's because you're quite an incredible author, and this is on one of my favorite subjects, writing horror novels. Is that right?
That's right.
How can
I at University California of Los Angeles, if you look at their extension program, I teach the writing the horror novel, and it's been one of the most popular classes there since like 2002.
Wow.
And so I do have some students that not only have gone on with this, but are more famous than me, which is kind of confusing.
Is that only available in person in the location? Is there a chance of people learning this online?
I've had students in South Africa. It's an online class. I just take people through some reading and writing exercises. And it's a class that you can take, anywhere. It's asynchronous. So if you're only available to take the class at 4:30 in the morning in Amsterdam, it's there for you.
Okay. Well, I do hope that I get to discuss that a little bit with you in a future session, because I think the subject of magic and art, especially writing, so deep. And then maybe I can pre-request to have you back on the show when How to Be a Modern Magician comes out, because that's in December, is it?
Right.
So would you be open for another discussion when that comes out?
Oh, of course. No, you're so much smarter than most of the people that run these things. Absolutely, I'll be back.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, I really appreciate that compliment. Don, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to having you here back with us soon.
All right. Well, be seeing you.
I've always felt a little different, a little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special. My father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science, absent of art, cannot explain, who instead of religion would have romance. And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.